Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of A Modern Nonprofit. Scott, I'm really excited to have you on board because, which we did talk about this originally, but I remember working with you in a contractor role very briefly. And before that, I worked for a very traditional nonprofit. I mean, everything was traditional. We paid checks a traditional way. We processed credit cards a traditional way. We did all of the things in a traditional way. And I stepped into your organization briefly, college bound. I didn't do a huge intro, but this is part of my intro. And I was just blown away. And everything had some intentionality behind it, and everything just seemed to be really modern. And when I think of a modern nonprofit, I definitely think of College Bound. So Scott, you have been the CEO of College Bound for how long now?
Since 2013.
2013. So you are certainly no, rookie at these sorts of things, and you've weathered College Bound through quite a journey. And one of the things I love, aside from all of the kind of new way of thinking, creative thinking, challenge status quo, think outside of the box, but I also have always really admired your fundraising. So I think we could talk a lot about many other parts of running a nonprofit, but you have very much of an entrepreneurial spirit. But then also commitment to the mission. So today, I really want to talk about fundraising and how you've been able to kind of master fundraising. You're kind of a master networker. Your events are wildly successful. And a lot of it, if I'm allowed to say, are largely you focus on unrestricted dollars. So you've been able to grow an organization without having to constantly worry about all of these strings attached to your money and figuring out, can we do this? Can we not do this? Can we do this? Can we do that? So I'm really excited, Scott. Thanks for coming on board. And I'm really interested in having this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. I appreciate that, Tosha, and I appreciate your assessment of where we are. I mean, I think it's if I told my team that we were very modern and cutting edge, I think they would probably laugh a little bit. But yes, I appreciate it nevertheless.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we could talk about so many different parts of your business that you run on a day in and day out basis. But like I said, I want to talk mostly about fundraising. So tell me, Scott, I consider you very effective in fundraising, and hopefully you do too. You're CEO, your background is actually not fundraising, right? You came up through kind of the program, like many CEOs do, but you've been very successful in fundraising. This is not an area where a lot of CEOs that come up through the programmatic side of the business are comfortable. So how did you become effective in fundraising?
Yeah, so I think that like the most important thing is I really do fully believe in the mission, right? Like I understand that the role of college degrees have not only in creating, paths to prosperity and opportunity for the students, but also the role it plays in society of creating a more equitable world. And because I believe that so much, I speak very passionately about it, right? Secondly, I'm really competitive. Like I want to get a gift. I want to secure a multi-year funder. I want people to believe in the students that we serve. So I am really eager and excited to get that right. And when I miss, I take it very personally, right? So I think that competitiveness is something that really matters. But I think the third part, the most important part, is I just have a phenomenal development team. Right? Like I have, Jenny and Sarah and Andrea, they are just always punching the clock to ensure that they know the role that they're playing in our mission, and they take that incredibly seriously. And so if I didn't have a team, like, I can be as passionate and as competitive as I want, but we just wouldn't get anywhere. So I think that's the kind of the perfect cocktail to make it all work.
Love that. Love that. Yeah, I can relate in many ways. Competitive, passionate about what you do, but you have to have a team to execute.
Absolutely.
I feel like you're kind of describing me in many ways. And I take it very personal when I don't win something or I can't help a client. They've chosen to go a different direction. I can't help but to take it personal, which you shouldn't. But, I guess that's what keeps us going, right?
I mean, I think it's on the front end. You got to have it right on the getting it right and spending the right amount of time and really figuring it out. And then again, if it doesn't work out, you do have to get beyond it, but you also have to feel the loss, and because you care that much. That's what I
love that. So like I said, most CEOs that I've worked with are executive directors, and even founders of nonprofits have no experience in fundraising at all. This is beyond their comfort zone. They don't know how to get started. So what would be your number one piece of advice that you would give a new CEO, ED founder role that doesn't have any of this experience? Where do they get started?
Well, I think I mean, I think it would depend on where they are, right? Like, and I guess maybe that's where the first thing would be just to use whatever resources are at your disposal. So when I worked at the University of Pennsylvania, I'd never written a grant before, but I was able to go to the development office and meet with a couple of people to write this massive federal grant. And I knew very little, like very, very little. But that resource was available to me, right? Then when I worked at Teach for America, they have an entire system and architecture built around fundraising that I was able to access and learn from very rapidly. That, really built me up as like as a fundraiser. And then I'd say, using your resources that are there for you is the most important thing. I would say the second thing is like, I mean, this sounds kind of odd, and I understand like being a white male, how this can be much more easy for me because I have a high likelihood of being across the table from someone who looks like me, is though not to be afraid, right? Don't be afraid to ask people for money. I mean, they want to be asked. If you're getting to the point where you're having a meeting, like you should be doing that. Like that is your role representing your organization as the face. And, the worst thing they could do is say no. There's nothing, nothing else. You're not going to lose a limb or something really terrible is going to happen. So you have to go in there with just a level of confidence and awareness that your mission matters and be very comfortable in asking them for money.
I love that. I love that because I've said a couple things during my journey of also being a CEO. Number one, I care more about the mission and the success of the business than any level of discomfort I'm feeling in that particular moment.
Right.
That reminds me of like what you just said, have those difficult feelings and uncomfortable, like, oh my God, I'm going to get sick if I go into this meeting, but you care more about your mission than being uncomfortable, right? Your own personal feelings.
I think that's a really good way to say it, Tasha. I think that like, I do also have to say, again, that comes a lot easier for me, right? Like, and if people do have that challenge, I would say to like, spend time in practice, walk in with a script, like whatever it is you need to make yourself more comfortable, do it because it can, assuaging your fears will only lead to good outcomes.
And I also have a philosophy in the for-profit world, generally, in almost every case when you're meeting with someone, let me kind of back up on sales training in the for-profit world. They always say, the biggest like issue with people not meeting sales quotas or bringing in that revenue is just simply not pitching in the for-profit or the nonprofit world is at that ask, right? And how many times, and I've seen this so many times with development directors, they don't like asking for money. And so kind of going back to those meetings and those encounters of having confidence, I think a lot of people will forego that ask. On the flip side, for me, if I never say, okay, prospective client, I hear what you're saying. I think I can help you. This is how much I think it's going to cost. Is this something you're interested in exploring more? I go into every conversation, as long as they're qualified and it makes sense, right? And it aligns with what I do. I make a point to myself in the spirit of practicing to ask, to make the pitch, to, offer up some option for them to give us money, for lack of a better word, right? Or for us to help them in the same way. And I think in many ways you could have some version of that mindset in the nonprofit world with respect to fundraising. I don't know. What do you think about that? Is there most cases you wouldn't ask for money? I mean, certainly if you interact with this donor every month, you don't want to be hitting them up for money every month, but what would you say about that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess it's interesting. I've heard people do this, right? Like when I came to College Bound, I was, our founder, she's awesome. She was like having a third meeting with someone and she has never asked him for money. And I'm like, why not? Like, why are you not? And she was like, well, we just have to get it to the right level. I'm like, that level doesn't exist past this meeting. I made a funny joke. I was like, you need to go in and say, Scott said, I need to ask you for $5,000. And
yes.
Lo and behold, he gave it. And like, it was like, okay, so like, let's do this. Like, I really feel that ask could happen in meeting one with this particular person. And so right. I feel that, you don't get a million chances. Right. I mean, I also feel that sometimes you are just getting to know people and like letting them know about your mission and helping them understand it. And then maybe the time will come for another thing. I would say though, as far as I'm concerned, I think that, whatever your primary like way of fundraising is. You have to be really good at that, and you cannot rely on it solely. So I see a lot of organizations that get really large government grants that then like lose the power to do individual fundraising, or they get state dollars, they get federal dollars, and then lo and behold, if there's a blip in those dollars, then they have no mechanism with which to fund their mission if something happens. And I think that knowing, knowing your exposure and where you've got some potential problems is actually really good as well. So making sure that you're diversifying and that you're consistently out there thinking about what's new. I think that one of the problems is when you get successful, right? Like at College Bound, we've been able to grow our event where we raise over $1 million for our event, which is about a third of our fundraising. And there's something really good in that. And then also we see that like the younger generations are not all that interested in events, so here in about 10 years, like the raising power that this might have might go down, and we have to be prepared then for what other ways we can supplement, our annual giving to make sure that it works that way.
Interesting. Good. So, you do so many other things besides just fundraising. I'm curious to know, how do you spend your week? How do you allocate your time? What do you spend most of your time on? You had mentioned earlier, being intentional about your diversifying your revenue, because, and I've seen this actually with several of our clients, where they become so dependent on government funding, they almost hinder their ability to do individual fundraising, right? So you're managing these contracts in a way that you can't, which also could be a programmatic compliance, lots of different, data points there that you have to collect and manage. Then you don't have the capacity to fundraise. So how do you divvy up your time in a normal week?
Are we talking pre-pandemic type normal week?
I don't know. Maybe you can do pre and post. Like, what would you like to return back to maybe at some point? Or maybe how has that changed even?
Yeah, interesting. So I would say, I just have this belief that as the CEO of College Bound, like my biggest individual impact I can have on the organization and the students we serve is in being the external representative of that. And that means that I'm primarily the face for fundraising. I'm primarily the face for relationship building. Now, I also have Jenny on the fundraising team who is has taken over a lot of this, and Sierra on external relationships who's taken over a lot of this. But still my focus has to be externally representing the organization. And so as such, I would say about 2/3 of my time is going towards fundraising and I would call it like relationship management, whether that's with K to 12 high schools, higher ed, other age organizations. We're a member of the steering committee for St. Louis Graduates, which is a fantastic, impact model that we have here in St. Louis. And then the rest of the time, I think, really goes towards mostly what I would call team management. It's having a level of awareness on what's going on the ground. It's being able to kind of do whatever I need to support, my EVP and CAO, what I need to do to support, program, whatever it is to really dig in. To hit it at the right level, I think is important. But I also have a problem too, where I really do want to be more involved with the students, and I get to do that once a year for cap and gown. And then I always get again where I really want to go back there sometime. But I think that's how it's worked here. There's other CEOs who don't have that, they're allowed to be more in the programmatic space. That's just not where we are. And I would argue that's actually probably not where most organizations should be.
I agree. I would agree. And I think that's the hardest part for anybody. I think even for me too, right? Because I'm less and less involved with our clients. I can't be involved in all of our clients. And I think that's true for any practitioner, specialist, anybody that, whether it's for-profit or nonprofit, but especially I think too in the nonprofit space, your role shifts. And as much as you love the programmatic side, your gifts and talents and the success of the organization is better suited in these other areas. As difficult as that is, and I've had conversations with different CEOs and founders over the years that it's a struggle to kind of remove themselves more and more from the mission that they help drive and create. But
as you reach a certain level, though, if it's 5 people that work in the organization, there's a lot of overlap. But once you start getting bigger, once your budgets start getting $1.5 million, $2 million, 2.5, then you have to have those layers. You're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
I bet Tosha, there was a time when you knew every single client by name. you knew the issues that all of them had, and then the limits of your business being able to grow would have been like this. You add other people, other talent, you're able to do that, and you have to relinquish a little bit of control. It's hard to do for a lot of people, especially founders, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you know, then it comes back to, for me, where I had to make that decision because I had a lot of my ego tied up into the fact that I did know every single client. I did know all of their issues. You know, I was on call to help every single one of them and to realize I can't help more organizations if I don't relinquish control, if I don't add more people to help me, which is what you were saying to me. You're able to do so much because you have a great team. Same way. I mean, your impact and your ability to work with so many more people is really driven by the team that you have. So now my role has shifted to how do I spread my institutional knowledge and my experiences and skills and talents across different areas of the team and hire more people so that there's not one single component of my business that can't operate without me. And I read, it was an article or like a comment left on a blog for accountants, but I think a lot of nonprofit founders could relate to this. It was said something like, I built myself, I built a prison around me and I have no idea how to get out. So, right. How many of us might feel that way sometimes where the organization is so dependent on one person?
Sure.
And it really made me think that's a very vulnerable place to be in if the organization is so mission critical, like focused on one individual, primarily the CEO or the founder, in the event something happened to me, or even I needed to take some time away or what have you. How long would this business continue on without me? Right. And what impact would that have on our clients and our employees that I've now taken responsibility for their livelihoods, right? So now my shift has kind of focused on how can I become less and less involved in mission critical components for the purposes of like continuity and succession. So next question I have for you, Scott, what is the biggest lesson you have learned as a CEO, you know, as it relates to fundraising? What's the biggest lesson learned?
Biggest lesson. You know, I'm going to kind of reference something you raised at the very beginning about restricted dollars. And I think that only this is it. Maybe I won't say the biggest lesson. Let me say the most recent lesson. I think don't be afraid of having deeper conversations with your funders, meaning that like I have sometimes talked to trustees who have, you know, they have policies that they may or may not like understand, right? So perfect example of this, we had recently a funder who was like, well, we don't like to fund salaries. And I'm like, that's cool. You know, personally, office supplies don't, you know, yield outcomes. So it like really, especially in our work, which is profoundly human, like a good portion of our cost is in salaries. You know, I have 40 people that are doing this job here at College Bound. And so that is where we're getting our impact. And so just even having this conversation with them about exploring what it is they're holding on to there. And like, then using examples to explain how we get impact, they're oftentimes like, oh, well, yeah, I think that what it does is two things. Like, first of all, it allows us to have a conversation and learn more about what they appreciate and what they don't appreciate. And secondly, it allows us also to be very honest about our accounting. You know, like I know that there's places out there where they're like, well, this doesn't really count as salary because it's programmatic in the work that we're doing. But like, it just becomes this 3-bounce system of trying to justify your expenses. I mean, this is back to the restricted funding issue, right? Like I would say most funders really care about your organization, the mission, and continuity and leadership. Very rarely do they care about specific individualized programs. Occasionally there are. And I would say that's great if you have something in the pocket ready to go that is mission aligned, that's going to get there, like great, go and do it. But I feel far too often organizations, especially small organizations who are under $5 million, tend to like chase dollars and, you know, creep away from their mission so that they can get to a funder. I would just, you know, I've just learned like, don't do that. Like really just present your mission and then ask for unrestricted dollars. You know, even if something is set up in a grants portal where it looks like this, like just, you know, if you're going to have to spend 10 hours in accounting, that's like 10 hours you're not going to have in serving your population. So like oftentimes people do that because they think that's what the donor wants and they never have that conversation with the donor. And if they did, they're like, hey, this is what I think. Am I right? The donor like, oh, no, not at all. You can do this instead. And it's like, oh, okay, great. Thanks for the conversation. So
Yeah.
ask your donors for the deeper conversations. Have them not just come and observe programming, but like if there are things in their process of doing things that you don't like, it's okay to have those conversations. It can only create further understanding. And I think that's a good thing to have.
I love that. I see that a lot. We're either creating new programs or iterations of our existing programs in response to what we think funders might want. When in reality, as you said, just having the conversation, it may mean you don't have to create anything separate at all. And a lot of times what I've seen on the accounting side, as we create these new programs, and sometimes we create new expenses that we otherwise would not have had. Meanwhile, we still have that fundraising gap in our ongoing, like what we're doing anyway. And the goal is always to get dollars to pay for the gap that we already have, not continue to widen the gap simply because, we're chasing the dollars. And I see that a lot with small nonprofits, probably all nonprofits, frankly, of any size. But it does create not just an accounting challenge, but certainly a budgetary issue as well.
I mean, I would actually then go so far as to say to any level of nonprofit is do not create grant funded positions. Unless it's going to be something that literally is just a one-time thing, right? Because I think you just get into, because on a good side, let's say you do something, it's really working and it's doing well, and you don't have the ability to fund it past that time. Then the question is, are you going to extend your expense lines? And so then everything gets less technically, or are you then going to say, okay, we've seen this being really effective. We're going to have to like make this part of our central mission. And I think I would say in my experience, I think more often than not, people follow dollars versus smart organizational strategy.
Yeah, I would agree with that as someone that writes the budgets for many of these grants. So another common thing I see with CEOs that are uncomfortable with fundraising is this idea, I'm going to hire a consultant, I'm going to hire a development director, I'm going to outsource or delegate that function because I'm not comfortable, or I don't know, that's not my skill set, or, all those different, kind of conversations that you probably have also been part of in your tenure of working in the nonprofit space. What do you say to that, to those people that want to just outsource or delegate this function?
Well, again, it depends on the size and the level of the organization. I think that there's times when it can work, but I would say don't hire the person as a development director. Hire them as either hire them as a executive director underneath your CEO title, hire them as like a, external affairs officer, whatever it is, make sure that they are deputized with more than just their field, because then they're going to have a greater understanding of the business, across the organization. And I think that the problem there is then, for organizations that are $1 million to $5 million, then what are you doing as, CEO? I think there are probably models where having a more programmatically focused CEO is a good thing. But I mean, in my experience, I just feel of organizations of this size, your unique role, the unique impact you can have in your role is that external representation. I just feel that and see that, because I'll tell you this, like if there is somebody out there who is like a very important donor, sometimes they're going to be like, I don't want to talk to the development director. I don't want to talk to, I don't care how empowered this person is. I want to talk to the key person in charge. And maybe that's ego and maybe there's something wrong with that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't change the fact that like, they're not going to do this if you're not going to be the one out there. So I'd say understand the responsibility that goes with the title. And if you don't like it, I would say maybe you should think about downshifting out of the role. I mean, program needs people. And if the reason is you don't feel comfortable asking for money, if I'm a board member, I don't want that person leading the organization. Like think about if you were on a board and their CEO said, well, we have to double the pay of our development director because our CEO doesn't want to ask for money. I think you would say, I don't think that person should be in their job. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being a little too cut and dry about this, but I've just seen very few places where that actually works. And the places where it does work, it tends to be very large organizations whose chief executive has like national level functions, or in some cases,
Right.
international level functions. So they need
Yes.
someone who is manning the day-to-day of fundraising, who is very empowered. I get that.
Right.
I'd say those are organizations that are $10 million plus,
Right. Well, and those organizations tend to have a good marketing team behind them that probably are diversifying their funding and doing, a lot of individual gifts, big campaigns. I'm thinking of like St. Jude's of the world, the Salvation Armies of the world, where their funding is not just, major asks and a handful of small gifts. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, Scott, one thing that my experience working with you too is not every CEO is going to have experience in all components. I mean, I know when you and I started working together a few years ago, one of your main goals, like, look, your background was not in the business side, accounting, financial side of the business, and you really committed, I need to understand more of this.
Yeah.
Even as the CEO, even as your primary function, as you mentioned, is more external affairs, fundraising, that sort of thing, obviously overseeing and delegating and managing, your senior leadership of your organization, but you wanted to understand and get better at even the accounting and finance side. So I think that there's a push that in that top seat, and I can relate to that too, that we have to teach ourselves areas of the business we just don't know. And frankly, maybe we don't have a huge interest in understanding, but for the success of the business, we just have to embrace all of those parts and at least be familiar enough that, we could effectively manage it. And I think that's an area in the nonprofit space that I've seen a little weak, and I'm sure many in the for-profit space too, that whether it's on the accounting side or the fundraising side or pick some other side, rarely is it programmatic, because I think a lot of the CEOs and executive directors come up through the program side.
Right.
That there's just not the understanding of that technical part to even effectively manage. So if we are hiring just a director of development, I've seen cases where the CEO has no idea how to even hold that person accountable. What metrics, what data points, like how much should they be checking in, and where are those milestones they should or shouldn't be hitting, and how to manage that when we don't hit. And on the flip side, I've seen on the accounting side, there's not that expertise to manage that function necessarily in-house either, because they have no idea whether it's being successful or not successful. And if it wasn't successful, they have no idea how to fix it. So, you're not expected to be an expert in everything, but certainly familiarize yourself enough about these things to know, is this working or not? And at what point do we need to have corrective action there?
Tasha, it's funny you say that, because when I first came to College Bound, so at University of Pennsylvania and at Teach for America, we both had accounting models that were external to our even departments, right? Like TFA was part of a national model. At Penn, there's a huge accounting team that basically fed us stuff already built, right? So my need to have like a depth of understanding of the finance and the budgeting and those sorts of things was very minimal, So when I came to College Bound, Andrea Morvek, who was our chief financial officer, she was just like almost laughing at my lack of knowledge here, and very quickly helped me get me up to speed, because that's a part where I feel, one of the things that I came with this understanding, though, that we should not be working with donors to restrict our dollars if the donors don't want and need restrictions, right? That's just easier for everyone. It's easier for the accounting. It's easier for the program. It's easier to not have to pinch every single penny that is aligned to this. And I think we've been very successful at that to a large degree. And then where we are going to have programmatic, making sure that we have an infrastructure behind it to support it. I think that those things really do matter. Similarly, on a budgeting side, I think we have shifted. Most nonprofits, I think, do operate with this poverty mindset, right? That there's this finite amount of resources and you're only going to be able to get so much, and you have to squirrel away money so that you will be effective. And I actually have to say, we are now kind of switching to being more of a surplus mindset, which is, what are the resources we need to serve our students who are coming from low income backgrounds? And if that means that we have to spend $1,000 for a student to be re-enrolled, we will spend $1,000. At the end of the day, it's relatively small in a grand scheme of things, because our people would be like, that's the thing that's preventing them from graduating. Oh yeah, no problem. Or if it's we have to help students pay off cable bills so they can get the free internet for the pandemic, yeah, that's something you do. You don't start going well, I don't know if we can account for it. And I'm we're either going to lose it on the front end or lose it on the back end when a student doesn't graduate. So I am thinking about this in a long term, and I think that it did take me a level of accountability that I hadn't had before. And we've always been lucky to have great CFOs and accountants on staff. And, we transitioned to working with the charity CFO. What was it, 2.5 years ago now, Tasha, I want to say?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's been phenomenal because, again, our accounting is not so complicated where I need someone day to day, checking the books. So long as my team knows what to do, we know what to do. We know where our money is going. We have a plan. When it doesn't go there, that we talk about it and we reflect on it, and then just as long as we're responsible and accountable to our donors and our stewards, I think that's our job and our role. And given the fact that we're about a $3 million organization, I think that's right where we should be.
Love that. Scott, thank you so much for all of these words of wisdom. For anybody listening,
well, I hope.
If they wanted to follow College Bound, what's the best and easiest way for them to connect and just kind of watch and look and see what, how you're handling things and what you're doing and what your organization is up to? Website maybe, or?
Yeah, so our website is, collegeboundstl.org. And then you can also, we are pretty active on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and that's all. Oh gosh, they're different. One is at cbstl.org. You've just got to look for those things, and we're out there. We post probably twice a week on each one of those social media platforms. So we'd love for people to get involved. We also have a fantastic event called Cap and Gown we do every June, and we're also going to be doing our trivia night coming November. So if anyone wants to get involved, we'd love to have them.
Awesome, Scott. Thanks again so much, and thank you all. If you have any questions or want to learn more about fundraising or anything else, make sure to subscribe to our channel so that you can get more updates, more episodes of all of the other CEOs that I work with and how they've been effective both on the operational side, their fundraising side, and the programmatic side. Thanks, everybody.